Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this virtual session. It was a pleasure seeing many of you over at the in-person session that we had last week. It was a pleasure to be in Santa Clara for the in-person version of DevWeek. I'm Lucas Mendes. I'm the founder and CEO of Revelo. Although I have an engineering background, I got my engineering and master's degrees in computer engineering in the École Polytechnique in Paris. I did turn over to the dark side and went into business and got an MBA from Stanford University. Uh, I work at Revelo. Revelo helps LLMs get better at coding using expert human data. So we specialize in helping hyperscalers, foundational model companies, turbocharge their human-in-the-loop processes and improve the quality of their LLMs code generation. We do that by relying on a massive network of expert software engineers to rapidly ramp up all the post-training efforts that are required for LLMs to really get better at coding. As I mentioned, we have a massive network of verified experts. We have a code-first annotation platform, which means higher productivity, lower expert attrition, and we have a lot of experience streamlining processes for those hyperscalers. Today, I'm proud to be joined by Mike Miller, who is a director at AWS AI. We are going to talk about a very interesting topic here. We're going to talk about how can AI get better at writing code. And last week in the in-person panel, we actually took a few steps into that discussion. So we spoke about code generation as being a key driver of LLM enterprise adoption, right? So if you look at all the data that's coming out, it's clear that code generation is one of the main use cases for Gen AI right now, and especially the one that's really moving the needle when it comes to generating revenue and generating adoption, right? So what that means is that code generation is top of mind for companies who are building those foundation models, right? So this is one of the first ways in which a new model gets graded in a way, right? As soon as you have a new version of an LLM being launched, you see the Twitter posts, the X posts, judging how good or how bad that version of the model is for code gen specifically. So in a way, code has higher visibility than other types of data, especially when it comes to LLM early adopters, right? So this also means that code has more value, right? So having an edge in code generation is probably the surest way to get ahead in the LLM race, right? So we spoke a little bit about this in the panel. You can get the full video of the panel by going on this QR code as well. I'll share the QR code later in the presentation. Some of the things that we took away from that discussion before we dive into the conversation with Mike here were the following. First, CodeGen is actually moving beyond just CodeGen, right? So the using LLM as assistants is really moving beyond just the code generation, just that V0 or V1 code generation. So first, one of the most dominant use cases seems to be automated testing. Nobody likes building unit tests and worrying about code coverage. So that's something that AI can definitely help with. Code migrations. We were joined by Anup from Amazon, who told us the story about Amazon using AI to migrate thousands of applications to a new Java version and really save thousands of hours of manual effort. I think it's 4.5 thousand years actually in worth of developer hours, and also lowering stress. AI can help with incident response and monitoring, right? We were also joined by Vinay from Augment, who spoke about the importance of using AI to navigate large code bases, right? As there's a little bit of evolution needed in terms of context windows growing and the tooling becoming more sophisticated, but AI should be able, in a short time frame, should be able to provide context-aware suggestions, even in very large and complex code bases, right? So the takeaway here is AI is no longer just a coding assistant. It is getting better. It is becoming a real-time engineering companion. It does have its limitations, though. It needs oversight. So AI-generated code can introduce vulnerabilities if not properly reviewed. It can write code that is verifiably correct, but it doesn't always follow the optimal design patterns. There's also issues in readability, And also, of course, as any LLM output, there's always the risk of hallucinations, especially when it comes to niche applications or niche code-based contexts where the training data just isn't wide enough or isn't broad enough for the model to have a lot of certainty. So AI today is more of an amplifier, not a replacement. And when we spoke about the engineering skills required to successfully navigate this and successfully use AI as an amplifier, we spoke a lot about engineers needing to guide and validate AI's output, right? Uh, we then moved on to wrap up the panel talking a little bit about human data, right? So human in the loop and human data is a way to use humans to do reinforcement learning and fine tuning in a way that it allows the model to capture more nuance, also reduces error, and in general, just bridges the gap between what the output is and what the developer was expecting, right? It leads to a better understanding of what the requirements were. It's also cost efficient, so you can actually have a pretty meaningful impact in output by using small data sets. You can actually improve data diversity, right? If you use global talent pools using input from different parts of the globe, you can actually reduce bias and improve generalization. And you can also zoom in on niche expertise and generate more data um, to help fine tune or reinforce train the model when that data is not available online. All right, so all that was covered in our in-person panel last week. I want to continue the conversation today and hear mostly from Mike. Um, Still on the same topic. We're still talking about the frontier of code gen and how can AI get better at writing code. But today we're going to move into a different topic, which is automated reasoning. Sorry for the long intro, Mike. This is
Whatever.
I really want to give everybody the same context about the discussions that have already happened. Um, Once again, thank you for joining us here. I would love to give you a chance to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your background before we dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lucas, and thanks Developer Week for having me. I'm really excited to be here to share some of my experience and what we're up to at AWS around helping out developers. So again, my name is Mike Miller. I'm a director of generative AI products at AWS. I've been with Amazon for about 12 or 13 years. I worked on launching Fire TV a long time ago, and then since then I've been in the AI and ML space at AWS. I'm currently on the next generation developer experience team, where I help catalyze and sort of coordinate and launch products that kind of cross organizational boundaries. And one of those specific areas is in automated reasoning. So, looking forward to giving everybody a glimpse into what that is, what it's about, and kind of how we think about it.
All right, so let's dive right in. There has been a lot of talk about reasoning models and chain of thought LLM responses. And if I understand correctly, automated reasoning is not that, it's something different. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about that and explain to the audience what that is?
Yeah, absolutely, and you hit the nail on the head. The terms reasoning are sort of bandied about, and hopefully I can help kind of clarify a little bit. So when the term artificial intelligence was coined, back in the 50s, there were a couple different branches of AI that people thought about and even named, and one of those branches was called symbolic AI. And symbolic AI, we kind of refer to as automated reasoning. They're kind of synonymous today. And symbolic AI and automated reasoning is all about representing concepts in mathematical logic and then using deduction and theorem proving to actually validate and prove 100% accuracy of those concepts that have been represented in mathematical logic. So kind of an easy way to sort of think about this is if you go back to like your high school geometry class where you learned about the Pythagorean theorem, right? Where you've got a right triangle and the square of the two sides of the right triangle, a squared plus b squared, always equals c squared, the length of the hypotenuse, right? And mathematical logic allows us to actually use deduction to prove the truthfulness of this statement. And what's interesting and different about that is we can prove it in such a way that for any right triangle and any length of the two sides, the length of the longest side, the hypotenuse, is always going to conform to that formula: a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now, we could use machine learning probably to come up with a similar result, but we might need to feed it, hundreds of thousands or millions of different right triangles, and it would sort of learn to kind of predict what the length of the third side of the longest side might be in relation to the short sides. But because of the way that language models and these sort of transformer models work, is that that's always a guess. It's always a prediction of what that sort of length of that third side is. Whereas with automated reasoning and mathematical logic, we can actually prove in 100% of use cases for all inputs A and B, where it's a right triangle, that the length of the hypotenuse, c squared, conforms to that formula: a squared plus b squared.
All right, so this brings me back to my college days when we were talking about Boolean logic and also decidability of algorithms, and you can prove whether they halt or not.
Yes.
How do you bridge that with combating AI hallucinations and
Yeah.
enhancing the reliability of AI output?
Yeah, absolutely. So really that's sort of the next step is, okay, well, how do we connect the dots? How do we take this sort of idea of automated reasoning and representing concepts in mathematical logic, and apply that to, combat hallucinations? Well, if we step back for a second, AWS has been using automated reasoning for over a decade, because there was a recognition that, mission critical, capabilities like cryptography, security, access. We can use automated reasoning to prove capabilities of our software, prove validity of the cryptographic functions. And so Amazon actually, invested heavily in, hiring automated reasoning experts and scientists to essentially build models of our systems in logic and then use that logic to prove that capabilities, were valid. So, for instance, cryptographic, algorithms, or um, proving sort of access controls. For instance, we've surfaced a few of these capabilities to AWS customers already. So there's something called IAM Access Analyzer, right, where you can kind of validate and provably verify that users of your AWS account have access in certain ways to various systems and capabilities, or VPC, network reachability. So you can validate that endpoints in your virtual private network actually have capabilities to be reached. We also have a capability called S3 block public access, and we actually use automated reasoning to prove that when you enable block public access on an S3 bucket, that there's absolutely no way in all possible inputs that someone from the public internet can actually access that bucket. So AWS has been using automated reasoning for a decade to build kind of verifiable capabilities into these mission critical systems. And the reason why it was limited to mission critical systems was because it was very difficult to build these logical models of capabilities and of systems. You had to hire an army of automated reasoning scientists, and they worked for, potentially a year or more to actually construct these logical models. With the advent of generative AI, we've basically turbocharged that step so that we can take a set of, let's say, procedures or rules and generate the formal logic that represents those formal rules very quickly and then apply them. And so that's what this new capability called automated reasoning checks inside of Amazon Bedrock Guardrails does. It allows you to take a set of policies, let's say, like maybe financial regulations for, withdrawals or money flow for accounts across state lines, encode those into mathematical logic, and then use those to validate LLM answers and prevent hallucinations. So, for example, in that scenario, maybe a financial institution has a chatbot that customers can ask questions about: how can I transfer money, or what are the sort of requirements for money moving between accounts? And the LM would make responses, and Amazon Bedrock Guardrails and these automated reasoning check policy could look at those responses and validate whether they're truthful according to the rules and procedures that were encoded.
So in a way, you have to establish a hierarchy, right? So the empirical guessing, as you put it, can come from the training data and the post-training data, but in a way, reason stands above that and validates whatever output comes out of the machine,
Yeah,
of the guess, right?
that's a great way to think about it, exactly, that there has to exist a formal model, a representation in that mathematical logic, almost of ground truth, right? Everybody kind of is familiar with ground truth. If the ground truth is a set of, like, policies or procedures or sort of, capability specifications, then we can use that formal model of the specifications to validate, the output from the LLM, is not hallucinating.
Yeah, we're going to get into a discussion about the relationship between automated reason and human data. I think human data, in a way, also attempts to build new ground truths when there's clear weaknesses in the model, but it goes about doing that through providing more data, which doesn't change the approach. It's still empirical. It's still training, but reason stands above that. So, yeah.
That's right.
I want to take a step further here, Mike, in the discussion, and it seems that you already have automated reasoning in Q Developer, right? And uh, as far as I'm aware, it helps scan software code for vulnerabilities and propose fixes. Could you talk a little bit more about that and elaborate more, maybe on how this approach can be applied?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I think that's it's great to mention Q Developer. That's our sort of end-to-end, generative AI, sort of software for software developers, right? We have an IDE plugin. There's sort of chat-based capabilities, and it's really designed to take some of those mundane, day-to-day tasks off of developers so that they can focus on higher value, more complex, more sort of thoughtful and creative work. And of course, some of those sort of mundane, like day-to-day tasks, involve things like unit test generation, right? Documentation generation and scanning code, right? So for security vulnerabilities and maybe references to open source and things like that. So QDeveloper integrates aspects of automated reasoning into some of those security scanning kind of capabilities today, but it's very much behind the scenes. There's a huge library of capabilities. Automated reasoning is just one of the things that our security scanning kind of capabilities leverages to validate a code that's either been generated or that's been written by a software engineer. Um, I think what's interesting if we sort of extrapolate that out, and this is probably where I think the audience really is interested in is like how does automated reasoning or how can we think about automated reasoning applying to code? And some of the things that we're thinking about today is um, when I talked about the bedrock guardrails and the automated reasoning policies, the AR checks, those things are applying to natural language, LLM output, right? And the specification, if you will, was sort of this policy or rules like guiding financial transactions. But what if a specification related to code or code behaviors? For instance, what if a specification was, hey, I don't want any of my functions to log PII data, or whenever I store data, it's always got to be encrypted, and it's got to be encrypted with these specific libraries to this type of configuration. And so some of the things we're thinking about now with automated reasoning applying to code is, can I take this specification and encode it into a logical model and then use that to validate some of the behaviors of my code? And so we're kind of thinking about those kind of areas as well now about how we might apply automated reason to code. And you'll see those kind of things surface into, various Q developer, features and capabilities at some point down the road.
And if I understand correctly, those specifications, they have to be objective, though. Like you have to be able to say yes or no to them for the automated reasoning to do its job.
Sure, and that's actually a very astute observation, like writing those specifications such that they can be sort of formalized and you can use them to actually be, achieve a provably true output, is kind of a technique. And so we're building sort of new sort of customer experience and sort of user experience capabilities which you'll actually see today. So in that AR checks, automated reasoning checks for Bedrock guardrails, we actually have a really unique user experience in there around how you can take the sort of procedure or the specification and turn it into a formal model. We use a few different techniques. We use a number of generative AI techniques to generate that. We use some additional validation. And then we have a really interesting sort of user experience in there where, a human in the loop, a human expert who's a subject matter expert without any coding expertise or without any sort of automated reasoning expertise can sort of iterate with the tool to refine that formal model and make sure that that formal model can be used to actually, provably verify that hallucinations don't exist.
That's great. And the reason why I pushed on the objective nature of the specifications, I mean, at the end of the day, they're logical propositions, right? They have to be either true or false for
Yeah.
the automated reasoning to work. Is because rewind to last week when we were at the Developer Week in-person panel, we spoke a little bit about the evolution of the role of human data. This idea that during post-training phases of LLMs, you can actually use specific human-generated input, either through preference indications or through new ground truth, pairs of questions and answers, to fine-tune the model, right? And some of our guests, especially Nilo from Microsoft AI and Paulo from Google AI, they both said that the role of human data might change in the future, right? Basically, as more of the reinforcement learning can actually shift to LLMs being the judges, LLMs being the raters, LLMs being the evaluators of that model, even using synthetic data. But so basically, my understanding from last week's conversation is that reinforcement learning for uh, problems that are verifiable will eventually be automated. You can use synthetic data or you can use LLMs as judges. So, in a way, do you see automated reasoning pushing the boundaries of that verifiability? Right? Are we talking
100
about okay? Now we can use machines, we can use machine learning, we can use AI to verify everything that is basically objective.
Absolutely. If you think about reinforcement learning, right, there's policies, right? And the policy, relies on something that can be verified, such that, you can provide rewards in that reinforcement learning algorithm based on when an output is, in the direction that you want or is, verifiable. Well, verifiable, in our world, in automated reasoning can equate to, a proof, a valid proof, right? And so we're looking at various ways of leveraging automated reasoning and sort of verifying the output as proofs in terms of the reinforcement learning rewards, or like you said, when you're doing judging and you're sort of validating output, automated reasoning can certainly be used, in those scenarios. So, yeah, I think that's super interesting, and automated reasoning is one of these fields where we can get away from necessarily the subjective or sort of well, it's verified, but in what cases is it verified, right? In an automated reasoning world, when we say something is verified, it's verified for sort of all possible configurations and all possible inputs, right? Which gives you a much higher degree of trust. And I'd want to come back to that, like as a company or as engineers, when you're thinking about embracing generative AI, some of the things that you should be thinking about are like, okay, how trustworthy is this solution? And, at AWS and at Amazon, security, privacy, customer trust is job zero for us and has been since we've been founded, right? So whether it's, like I said, some of those automated reasoning tools for block public access or verifying network reachability, to actually saying, hey, Q developer has a capability of customizing its outputs and kind of fine tuning its outputs based on a customer's own code base. So a customer's repository could be used to sort of fine tune the output of Q developer, whether that's specific coding practices or libraries or other things. All of that data is 100% secure and private to those customers. And that's what's going to build the trust in these systems. And developers are going to have to, embrace these systems that actually they have high degrees of trust in. And so it all kind of comes back to that.
Yeah, on that topic, Mike, how do you see the roles of engineers and engineering leaders evolving, right? So a good part of our audience here are watching either live or during the recorder. is comprised of either individual contributors or engineering managers, VPs of engineering, et cetera.
Yeah.
What skills do you think they should prioritize in that new world?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there's a lot of sort of, FUD, fear, uncertainty, sort of doubt whenever there's a radical sort of technology change, like we're sort of going through today. But I think if you look back historically and you think about what's gonna happen now, with any one of these sort of inflection points in technology, let's say when we move to sort of the web, right? Uh, there there's a huge amount of opportunity that opens up. And, one of Amazon's leadership principles that I love to embrace here is called learn and be curious. And, every engineering leader and engineer has to really sort of supercharge their learn and be curious gene, if you will, right? Um, and they've got to be curious about what kind of new opportunities are opening up here. And if you think about how generative AI works and sort of the agentic world that we're sort of moving towards, really it's going to be about like maintaining your sort of your critical thinking skills, obviously, but also considering your sort of your leadership skills and your communication skills and your creativity, because you're going to have to guide the generative AI, whether it's in terms of specifications or prompts or other sort of new techniques to sort of tell the generative AI what you're looking for in terms of the programs or functions or user kind of capabilities. And so those are the kind of skills that I think everybody's going to have to kind of continue to sort of push on and prod and make sure they're sort of taking a growth mindset around those sort of skills to really work best with generative AI moving forward.
And I think still in that topic,
Mhm.
there's I've gotten a lot of questions from people who are either aspiring engineering leaders, or are thinking about entering the world of software engineering right now. What advice would you give to people who are coming into this new world and it looks completely different than what it looked like 10 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully they're pretty excited, and they're invigorated by, what the possibilities, can be. I would say, take advantage of the learning opportunities. So, Amazon just, in 2023 announced this AI Ready initiative where our goal was to educate, I think 2 million people with free AI skills by 2025, or maybe it was even 3 million people. And so we've got a number of sort of free courses and capabilities that software developers of all skill levels and builders of all skill levels can go and embrace. Um, so really, it's about sort of looking for those opportunities, getting your hands on as much as possible. There's a really interesting product that grew out of sort of the learn and be curious mindset at AWS. So one of our engineers, back a year or two ago was like super curious about prompting and prompt engineering, and they built a little UI and a little tool where they could sort of chain prompts together and sort of explore things. This thing took off like wildfire inside the company just by literally word of mouth. And all of a sudden, you had like lawyers and marketers and UX people and business people using this tool to kind of get some intuition about generative AI. We actually turned it around and launched it publicly. It's called Party Rock. It's a great way for newbies to sort of get some hands-on with generative AI and understand how you might use and direct generative AI to build applications. And it's totally free. So search out those kind of opportunities, flex your creative muscles, and look for ways that you can grow your skills.
Great. That's a great point of view. Let's go back to automated reasoning for a bit.
Yeah.
From what I understand, it can really change how people make decisions, right? So as long as you have an assistant trying to always help you in that pursuit of truth, of ground truth, um, how we think about decision making can actually change. How do you see this impacting leadership roles in organizations? I mean, especially when it comes to strategy or operational decision making.
Yeah, it's a fair question, and it's something that we need to be cognizant of. What are the strengths and weaknesses of automated reasoning, and where can it be applied? And this is a place where automated reasoning is not a silver bullet. It's not going to stop hallucinations, 100% of the time for LLMs. It's not going to be able to sort of provably validate that, my marketing message is empathetic yet, accurate, right? It's really based in, symbolic logic and formal reasoning and formal models. And so automated reasoning is really well suited when you've got a set of, policies or specifications that can be represented formally. And then those formal specifications can be used to prove or validate output. So from a strategy perspective and from a leadership perspective, maybe there's elements of decision making that where automated reasoning can come into play to validate specific facts or capabilities or specifications. Um, but that the creativity, sort of the critical thinking, and sort of like the think big and sort of innovation side of the world is still going to be a very human powered kind of activity.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just going back to what we were saying before, there are aspects of Gen AI that are where the output is subjective. Like the grading of the output cannot be made objective. Recently, in our human data work, Revelo, we had to help a hyperscaler reestablish new ground truth for interfaces built through React.js that looked aesthetically pleasing. Now, how do you do that with mathematical logic? Well, you simply can't, right? And I guess at some point we might get to a specification that is robust enough and is specific enough for it to be judged as aesthetically pleasing. But that's not where we are right now.
Right.
So
Right.
completely understand your point.
Yeah, kind of
But
functionally, I like if there were functional specifications like, hey, the user needed to achieve this specific output, what are the various ways you can sort of walk through the software paths to get to that output? Maybe those things are provable, right?
of course. And let's talk a little bit about success cases. Are there any specific success stories or that you can share where this approach has made a really big impact?
Well, I mean, certainly internally at Amazon, like I mentioned, we've been using automated reasoning for over a decade. Yeah, there's absolutely success cases and sort of things that have been exposed to our customers, but also things that we've done internally to kind of validate and make ourselves more efficient. So, for instance, proving our cryptographic libraries, right? So now we have this sort of higher level of trust and expectation that our cryptographic libraries are going to be sort of basically like the encryption and decryption stuff is going to be provably accurate, right? One of the things we did, think about S3, right? Our
Mhm.
simple storage service. It's one of the biggest services at AWS, right? And so, and the performance of S3 is critical, right? And so, any changes to the S3 code base by that service team are, they get lots of visibility, and we want to make sure that if there's changes to the code base, they don't ripple or impact other things. So one of the things we did with automated reasoning is we built the formal models of the S3 kind of code base and primitives so that if we made changes to S3, we could prove that those changes don't break any existing functionality. And that has allowed that team to move so much faster and operate with a higher level of confidence and trust that, hey, even though we might be making changes to, let's say, the underlying engines of how S3 works, we can use automated reasoning to prove that it's not going to break or have impacts that we weren't expecting. And so this has allowed the S3 team to innovate and move much faster. And so those are the kind of things that we're seeing internally. With customers, they're excited about leveraging the AR policy checks for Bedrock guardrails. Companies that are, building chatbots or using LLMs and natural language to sort of prevent hallucinations. So PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, is gonna be using these Bedrock guardrails, the AR checks, to validate for their customers chatbot kind of interactions, whether they're around financial or pharmaceutical or other sort of highly regulated industries. So we're going to see more of those over time. The product today is in a preview release, and it's going to become generally available for all customers later this year.
Got it. And Now, not concerning only automated reasoning, but Gen AI in general, and particularly when it comes to code generation, which is our main topic here. Um, we're seeing evolution happen very fast in the realm of human data, reinforcement learning, and supervised fine tuning. Um, from your perspective, if we look 5 years ahead, how do you envision the evolution uh, of automated reasoning? Could it be a standard layer in AI models for validation and verification? Is it something that you see emerging in other players in the space as well?
I think you're absolutely right. I think there's gonna be a few different ways that we see automated reasoning and its kind of capabilities integrated throughout, the generative AI kind of life cycle, if you will. I think, there's gonna be innovations around how automated reasoning can be used during the, model training phases, right? Like you were talking about, Will. There's all these sort of new advancements in reinforcement learning, new algorithms. I think automated reasoning is going to be able to play a role in those kind of capabilities, whether it's using automated reasoning to generate, accurate synthetic data or to, provide these reward functions and sort of play a role in sort of policy optimizations in terms of model training. I think you're also going to see it inserted into various layers of the stack, whether it be, in relatively simple applications like today, where Bedrock guardrails and you're sort of validating LLM output, to things in the agentic world. Can we have if you have an agent orchestrator that's, asking, six other agents to go off and perform tasks, can we have a reasoning layer that's agentic based such that, we can validate the reasoning of agents as they bring their results back? Maybe the orchestrator has a reasoning sort of layer in it as well, such that we can kind of validate the reasoning of each of the individual agents, and an overarching layer sort of look at that and kind of generate sort of proofs or sort of provably evaluate kind of thing. So yeah, I think there's a lot of ways, and we haven't thought of half of them yet today, where automated reasoning is going to be applied. So looks like a pretty bright future. We're excited about it.
All right. And just heads up to everyone, we're heading towards the final few questions of the conversation. If you have any other questions that you'd like to ask us, feel free to post them on the chat. Um,
I
all
see
right.
somebody tried out Party Rock, so good job.
Uh,
Yeah, go check it out. Partyrock.aws.
all right. So more in general, AI is becoming an integral part of cloud computing. So you mentioned several applications in security and guardrails and verification. Um, how is AWS positioning itself to lead in the space? I mean, especially with the rise of AI native cloud platforms.
Yeah, I think when you think about AWS, right, you think about, cloud computing, where we have a priority on both security, and privacy, but also innovating on behalf of our customers, right? And that's where sort of it comes down to, and we think I'm a member of the next generation developer experience team, and that's exactly where we're focused on is okay. Developers have an existing experience that they have today where they interact with IDEs and they write code and they sort of perform these actions in these certain ways. And we're kind of thinking radically like, okay, what if there were no boundaries here? What can we do to enhance the developer experience? And the Q developer product is really just like the first step. I think if you're familiar with Bezos or, Amazon in general, we use this term day one.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think,
Yes.
when we think about generative AI and its application for, software developers and code generation, we're at day like 0.01. Like this is like you haven't even woken up and had your coffee yet, in the day that we're at for generative AI. And so that's our focus, while we sort of keep customer trust very high, right? We hold to those baseline principles and we make sure that what we're delivering is going to be usable to build innovations for your customers, for your customers' customers today and down the road.
And when you think about specifically, you mentioned Amazon Q, and I think that um, uh, a lot of the conversation around code generation, especially among the skeptics, is that is it's really hard to measure ROI within an engineering organization, right? It's really everybody feels that the productivity gains are there, but they're really hard to measure. Have you seen anything, any point of view emerging there? I mean, I've heard people talking about adoption as a way to measure that, right? So if you give your engineering team a new tool and it's adopted organically or very widely, it's used frequently. If those type completions are mostly accepted, probably means that it's helping. Um, how are you guys thinking about proving the ROI of those solutions and those tools to your clients?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's something that I think everybody kind of struggles with today because it's such a new paradigm. We have reports from our customers where reporting acceptance rates of software suggestions by Q developer. So you've got like maybe how many characters or lines of code have been accepted. You've got a couple of different ways of measuring it, and that's something that when you work with AWS and we deploy the solutions, we sort of talk with you about what are the goals, what do you want to achieve, and we'll work with you to kind of help make sure that we establish measurements and guidelines where you can kind of validate, the value, of the software. But I think when it comes down to it, is it, there's sort of soft measurements. Are your developers sort of more passionate, and does that come out in sort of more productivity and sort of interesting, sort of innovative ideas? And then there's sort of like the very sort of tactical, like time on task and sort of code acceptance rates and things like that. So I think there's going to be a blend of those that are going to have to be combined, and companies are going to have to think about multiple ways of looking at the ROI that comes from generative AI, coding assistance.
Great. Um, to wrap up, I am going to put you on the spot. We actually have a podcast at Revelo called Tech Teams Today. And you guys, if you're listening to this, you can look for the podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. But for every guest that comes on to Tech Teams Today, I ask the following question. What is an opinion that you have about engineering management or adoption of AI in engineering that sort of goes against the grain of what you hear most people saying?
Oh,
That's
you
a tough
definitely
one,
have
I
put me
know.
on definitely have put me on the spot. So an opinion that I have, that goes against maybe the status quo or the existing sort of opinions of folks
Yeah,
today. Gotcha. Um, let's see. That's a that's a tough one. Uh,
you can opt out.
given the range of opinions, that folks have, I don't know that I have many that would go against the grain. I think there's just I'm a glass half full guy, so for
Okay.
me, I'm just really excited about the opportunities that generative AI is going to bring to the table and the things that we haven't yet seen developed, right? So I think maybe one of those sort of capabilities, or one of the opinions is, hey, generative AI is interesting, but maybe it'll only work for sort of like these super basic kind of things, right? Um, and I think the complexity that we're going to be able to see, eventually, with the right kind of guidance and creative thinking from developers, is gonna be kind of radical, right? So I think developers are still going to need to be deeply engaged in the process. And they're going to work with generative AI to achieve these really interesting, complex outputs.
That's great. I think that's not only a glass half full opinion, but it actually echoes. I don't know if you guys know Ray Kurzweil. So he is an optimist, and he talks about our inability to understand exponentials. Right. So things are accelerating, and we don't really have an idea of how much is going to accelerate in a few years. So yeah. So things that look unachievable or impossible to obtain with the current state of Gen AI. Just wait a few years. That's probably going to accelerate. All right.
Well, thanks, Lucas.
Um, Mike, thanks so much for joining us here. Thanks everyone for joining this conversation. We'll leave our contact information here on the chat. So if you want to keep this going or ask any questions, please just let us know. Thank you so much.
100%. It was great chatting.